Did anything materialize as far as recording the whole album that you ended up having to take with you to another label? Did anything recording thing at Interscope?
I recorded I recorded pretty much a whole album. We released I think we released a single or two singles. That's when I had the group The Funk Family. So I think we released two singles off of that album, but we never released the album. I think we just finished it like right around the time they lost their distribution deal. So he basically let me go, let me out of it took him it took him maybe a year. He was trying to find another deal. Um, so it took him it took him a while to kind of make up his mind to kind of let me go. And then during that time when he was deciding whether or not he was going to let me go or find another distributor, American Recordings came knocking, and I was transitioning from the Funk Family project to working on this Black Sperm album, and I was actually managing a few other groups and dealing with a few other my younger brother Born his projects. Um, so Jerry took maybe about a year after he lost his distribution deal to just finally be like, give me a release and let me take my masters. And so I had all those songs, and I wound up releasing them years later, but we never released them through Interscope or through Product Group.
Right. So exactly what was Funk Family? Was that supposed to be your solo album, or was just a group effort going into the Interscope deal?
It was me not. I never really felt comfortable being a solo artist
Okay.
um, back then. So I always had tons of people artists around me whenever I was recording. So my younger brother, I had probably 7 or 8 acts that had their own little crews. So I just took kind of the best of each crew, and we kind of formulated the Funk Family, which was big was technically my solo project, but I just used it to feature other artists because the plan this is pre Wu-Tang was to get everybody their own deals and have have everybody else have their own deals, and we all be under this one kind of structure.
Right. And you mentioned American Warner Brothers. What happened over at that?
So once Jerry gave me my release, they were kind of Dan Charnas, who was the A&R at the time, passed my CD along to Rick Rubin. Rick flew me out to LA, and I remember meeting him at this pizza place in Hollywood. And I walked in, and I see Mick Jagger sitting at this table, and some other cat, and they were talking. And so me and Dan were walking through the restaurant. I said, "Yo, that's Mick Jagger," and Dan was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, he's over there with Rick." So we sit down with Rick, and uh, and Rick starts talking to me, and he's like, "So this is the Black Sperm thing. That's your project." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, we want to sign you. We want to sign you like now." So I left LA with a deal. Um, we recorded the album. Rick signed me based on the stuff that I was doing, the sound that he heard from the Funk Family stuff. So because when I was pitching it, I pitched those songs as Black Sperm songs. But when I started recording the Black Sperm album, I had 3 kids. I was 24 going on 25, and I was not the 17, 18, 19-year old I was, I was talking about grown up stuff.
Right.
So we kept butting heads about creative wise the direction that he wanted the project to go. And eventually we released two singles. We released Days and Days, and we released this single with the song called Nanoxinol Rhymin'.
Okay. Yep.
Um, and then right around the time where we were talking about releasing the album, he just kept he created like a subsidiary label. I guess he was trying to get away from hip hop because he was heavily producing a lot of rock stuff. He was doing Johnny Cash at the time, and he was doing it was the Black Crows,
Mhm.
one of those artists, and he was doing Sir Mix a Lot. So I think he was kind of trying to phase himself out of the hip hop. So he created like this. I think at the time Russell and them were doing Rush Associated labels. He created kind of like a subsidiary label situation like that. And once he did that and kind of wanted to put the album out on that, I was like, nah, that's not the same, you know. So I asked for a release, and it took maybe a few months for him to give me a release. But he gave me a release. He was real cool about it. Gave me a release. Gave me my masters, and I was off again trying to find another situation.
Where'd you find yourself after that situation?
I think after that, we're going into like the mid to late '90s. I got more on the label side, and my attorney at the time, this guy named Kevin Glickman, um, he was the attorney for Rough House Records. So this is like 97, 97-ish. Um, so he hired me and two of my boys to kind of be the street team slash record label for a like a subsidiary label that they had called Contract Recordings, and it was all based out of in Conshohocken, right outside of Philly. So while we're running around in the evenings promoting Fuji La and Cypress Hill and uh, all their acts that they had, I think they were doing what's those kids? Crisscross was big at the time. Well, we're running around promoting those artists during the day. At nighttime, we'd be in Joe DeBush's studio, and I'd be recording. I was working on another project, and it was actually produced by Z and Tony D, which was the first time they had worked together or been on the same project in probably about 15 years at the time, or 10, 15 years at the time. So I was working on this If Looks Could Kill album, and while I was there, I think we were there for probably about a year. Um, in the last 3 or 4 months, we recorded that album, and then things kind of went weird between me and Kevin. It was money, like a money issue,
Mm.
and we I pulled my guys out of there, and I think we it was right after we signed Scott Lark. We signed Scott Lark to the label, and we signed Wise Intelligence to the project through there as well. So he just didn't want to pay us, and I couldn't juggle another year of you know struggling, and being a starving artist
Right.
and going into my going into my late 20s, early 30s. So we wound up leaving there, and then I came back to Houston after that. Well, no, I went to Atlanta first and worked with Z for a little while. Then I came back to Atlanta. I went back to Houston.
Okay. If we can back up just a little bit, you had a hand in working on Pushnikin's debut album.
Yeah, yeah, that was in the early 90s. That was probably 93, 94. They got signed. My DJ, Drew from Brooklyn, was really good friends with them, lived around the corner, I think, from Chip's girlfriend at the time. So I became really cool with those guys. And then I was also cool with Special Ed. And he had a guy with him that was named 40 Love. That was were from Flatbush. So I would for a year when I came back from Houston from touring, I moved to New York and I stayed in East New York with my DJ for about a year trying to shop before I got my first record, before I got my publishing deal, my first record deal. So I was out there for a good year. So Chip and I became really good friends, and his guys, Mock and Pac, we all became really really cool. We actually were like working on a coalition project called Many Minds at one time. But when they got signed to Jive, they used to come to my studio sessions in Jersey, and they were just blown away how we used to just knock out 4 or 5 songs in a session. So
Mm.
one day we were in the city, and they were like, "Come by the studio and jump on this song with Fife and Black Sheep," and I was like, "I'm on my way."
Right.
You know what I mean? And it was dope. It was fun. Those guys used to trip me out because they'd be in the studio, literally making songs in the studio, like sampling records, and they're in Jive Studio, so they're paying $150 an hour kind of rates. And
Right.
it used to trip me out. I was like, I need one of those budgets. But it was so much fun recording that project, that song with them.
Right. You said you ended up moving to Atlanta. Is Black Sperm still together at this point?
By then, I pretty much was. By then, I pretty much left that in my rear view, and wouldn't pick that up again probably until the mid 2000, like 2000, and I think I finally released that stuff like 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. But by the time I moved to Atlanta, which was like early 2000, I think it was like 2000, to work with Z. Z was working on a new project, and I was doing at that time I was doing production. I was phasing out of being an artist, working for a record label, and then I started doing production. I went to Atlanta. Tony had heard some of my beats and was like, and gave me the cosign. And at the time, I was like, I didn't think I was that good. Um, but right before I left, he pulled me to the side and was like, "Bro, you," because I had recorded some songs with my younger brother. We had a group called Sworn Secrecy. We shot a couple videos and did some stuff in Philly. So I was just trying to test my waters with being a producer, trying to phase out of being an artist and going to production, being a producer. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my next phase going into production because I after that I did production for Fox Sports and I really got on the music licensing side. The guy who signed me to my first record deal, Jerry Davis, he became the music director for Fox Sports like early 2000. So he started bringing me under his wing and started showing me the whole music licensing game, and I started selling music to Fox Sports and Turner and TNT and all kind of different networks and started getting money on that side of the game.
Right. Before that, did any album officially come out? Was everything pretty much shelved until later years? Maybe.
There was. Yeah, everything pretty much. I just had single releases, and then, uh, it's crazy because during those times when I was dropping all the recording all that music, it's I don't know, maybe I think I had just too much my integrity level was like I didn't feel comfortable releasing stuff, you know, without feeling like it was gonna get like a full push or a full, you know what I mean? So
Right.
I felt like I'd rather it's different now because now it's like I just love just putting out music whenever I'm feeling it. But back then it was just like I don't want the world to hear this until I know it's gonna get the proper push. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I was very handcuffish with with product like that, you know.
Right.
Um, and then when I started getting on the production side and working with Z in Atlanta, that's when I really started feeling like, I got to get this music out, you know.
Right. At what point did you form Ambidextrous Music?
That was around that time. That was around early 2000. I started traveling. I was traveling from Atlanta to Houston to New York, and then I met these guys in Portland, Oregon, and became really good friends with a bunch of guys out there, and started recording a bunch of music out in Portland, because they flew me out there to start recording. They started buying a lot of my music, my production side. So I started. I was starting to grow as a producer in Houston and in Portland, but I hated it only because at that time. Um, that's kind of when the music industry kind of was starting to shift.
Mm,
So producers weren't getting paid what they were getting paid in the 90s, and especially on an underground level. So I would go to studio sessions and we agree on a price, and then I get to the studio and then it'd be another price, so I was already doing so much stuff on the licensing side. I just kind of fell back from the artist thing and producing artists and started, really focusing on trying to license. I really wanted to build a music library that I could license out at some point to all the networks, and you know
right.
that became one of the things really wanted to do at that time. So
For
that's
those
how Ambidextrous started.
for those who may not know, where did some of your placements end up as far as artists using your song?
A lot of these underground cats, a bunch of cats from Portland. Um, Z worked on Z worked on a few projects in the early 2000s that I released. He dropped a single called Blink that I recorded and released for this soundtrack called Bachelor Party. So it was a lot of underground stuff. Some artists here in Houston. I was working with a lot of artists here in Houston, but mostly like underground cats. It wasn't anybody big or mainstream.
Okay. So your album finally dropped 2003, self-titled debut.
Yeah, yeah, I dropped that that's the first project that I actually ever recorded, released, had a drop date, did all of that, and that's probably the one of the best time periods as far as recording as an artist. 'Cause I recorded that in Dallas at the studio called The Kitchen. It's the same studio that Erica used to record at, um, and I produced up, I think 90% of it I produced. One of my homeboys, this cat named Lacey, produced a couple of songs. Um, but it was one of those moments where I just it's the freest I ever felt like recording a project. I didn't have a whole bunch of guys in the studio. I didn't have a whole bunch of features. I just kind of went in there and took my time putting it together and went in there recorded it, and that's one of my favorite projects.
Did you use any of past music and kind of incorporate it to that album, or was everything done from scratch?
It was pretty much everything done from scratch. I had a feature on there with this cat at the time who's an underground legend here in Houston. This dude named Rick Royal, and he was in this group called Royal Flush. They were the first group to sign to Rap a Lot,
Okay.
and so that's one of the reasons why I really love that project because he's one of my favorite rappers. He passed away maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I think right around the time of COVID, right around either before or right around when COVID started or right after it started. But he's 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 responsible for groups like UGK, and it's a lot of underground like artists here in Houston and that those guys kind of raised up from back in those days.
What do you remember most about the feedback from that project when it dropped in 2003?
Um, it was good, man. We got a lot of shows, and we got it was one of those kind of critically acclaimed kind of things. I didn't have a big budget when I put it out. I put it out independently and just kind of worked it myself, and it did decent. But I get people to this day coming to me talking about that project. You know,
Right.
um, yeah, it was a fun project. It was a really good project.
You also teamed up with Lennox Gordon for a project. I'm not sure if it's seen the light of day, but talk a little bit about your relationship in that project.
Lennox, that's my guy. He's a former NFL football player, buddy of mine, and the only reason that project really didn't come out the way it needed to come out is because he got incarcerated, like right around the time that we finished the album, like right after we finished the album, he got incarcerated for about 5 years, and still a friend of mine to this day. We still talk about doing music sometimes, but that project was fun. He was new to the industry side of recording and producing an album from scratch, and so it was fun just to kind of give him that game and show him the whole side of writing and producing an album and then marketing and promoting and putting it out. But yeah, that was a fun project. I think we shot 1 or 2 videos for that project as well.
So, how'd you link up with Black World Entertainment?
That's YZ's one of his companies. So when I was in Atlanta working with him on his projects, I think that's around the time that he formed Black World. So when I first decided to re-release or finally release some of the Black Sperm stuff and the Funk Family stuff, I went to him and said, "Let's do it together." So I think we dropped the first issues of those through Black World. I think we did the Funk Family album through there. And we did the Black Sperm album, and then a few years later, I did it again myself independently. Every few years, it seems like either if I don't re-release it because the demand is there because people are just hitting me up saying they want vinyl, someone will come to me. Like recently, we just did a deal with a company from Germany who's going to release the Black Sperm album, the Funk Family album, and the album that I recorded when I was working for Rough House, the If Looks Get Killed album, and they're going to drop all three of them at the same time. I think sometime beginning of next year. So, every few years or so, it's like a resurgence of those projects coming back out.
What has the reaction been like for those who may not have been familiar with Black Sperm as well as the Funk Family?
It's cool, man, because we got these young fans that hit me up from Switzerland and Japan, and I mean just all over the world. Every once in a while, get a DM or email from somebody saying, and it's always young folks. It's always like people in their 20s that pick it up, found it somewhere, somebody showed it to them, somebody played them a song. So it trips me out that, something that we recorded 30 years ago and some changes, people are still vibing out to it now. And like some cat hit me up the other day and said, and asked me, what did he ask me? He asked me a question about one of the songs, and I'm looking on his page just to kind of see who his kid is. He's probably about 18, 19 years old, and he's asking me questions about like why, he asked me how did I come up with the name Black Sperm, and why did I use that as the name of a group? And I was telling him that it was the name of one of my brother's songs. And when we recorded the song, I did the hook. And after we finished the song, I said, you know what, I think I'm gonna name my group that. And my brother was pissed because he was like, oh, that's such a dope name. I should have, and so I told the guy the story, and he was like, oh, that's a trip. But it's just crazy, man, to hear people, you know, I'm 53 now, and hear people still talking about this music that I wrote and created when I was, 18, 19, 20 years old.
Right.